In this video, we're going to be replacing the front brakes on this 2012 Mitsubishi Outlander, and the process is going to be the same for driver and passenger side. So we're going to be doing front brakes on this 2012 Mitsubishi Outlander. We're going to go ahead and remove the tire now. We're going to use a 17mm socket and go ahead and take out the lug nuts and the tire. So the next step to get access to our brake pads and rotor is to go ahead and remove this caliper. We're going to do that by removing these two bolts, one on top here, one on the bottom here. We're going to go ahead and back those out with a 14mm. Once you get to a certain point, you should be able to slide them out. You have a little bit more to go. Just twist and pull if they don't come out easy. And we'll do the same for the top. Before we do the top, we're going to grab a strap, a cable, something to tie this caliper up and hang it out of the way. You do not want to put pressure and kink or bend your brake hose. So let me go ahead and grab something now. And this one's in there pretty good. There is a torque spec for these bolts. Somebody may not have paid attention, or it might have been in there so long. I switched over to a breaker bar to get a little more leverage. Let's see if we can get that out. Just going to go ahead and put a little rust penetrant on these bolts that we know we're going to have to get to. Let it soak in now. With the pry bar clip tool, just try and push these bolts out. This one's been in here a while. Definitely want to take care not to mar the threads while you're doing this portion. As you can see, the caliper is very loose. Now's the time to start thinking about hanging it up and keeping one hand on it while you remove the pin. There's the pin. Caliper will slide straight back, and you want to inspect in here for any cracks, breaks, or leaks in the rubber seal around your caliper piston. That looks okay as far as leaks, so we're going to go ahead and tie this up and out of the way. So to get this rotor out, we need to take off the caliper bracket, but now we have access to take off our brake pads first, so we're going to do that. Just slide straight out. Same with the other one. I'm just using a panel tool to get behind them and push them out. And also your brake pads will come with new hardware. Go ahead and pop out the old hardware. Now we can have access to our caliper bracket. On the back of the caliper bracket, you'll see 2 bolts. They are 17mm bolts. I'll go ahead and remove those now. Same thing here, you just want to keep one hand on the bracket. Once you remove this bolt, the bracket's free. There's our bolt, and now bracket slides out of the way. So now we have access to our rotor. The rotor slides in over these studs. Sometimes with a little bit of persuasion, you can get that rotor to slide off. This one's been on there for a while and it's definitely seized and stuck to the hub in the back here. We're going to use a dead blow hammer, see if we can get some movement. What you also want to do is loosely thread at least one lug nut back on there, a few threads, so if this rotor does pop off, it's not going to fly off onto your toes. That'll stop it. Since the dead blow didn't work, we're going to switch to a little bit of a heavier hammer and get some hits on the back side forward to see if that helps. Now that it's free, remove this lug nut and the rotor. Before we go ahead and mount our new rotor on here, we're going to clean up this mating surface so everything sits flush and try and help corrosion. We will put some anti-seize on the back of this also to help the new rotor, if it ever needs to come off again easier. So we'll go ahead and grind this down now. You can use a wire brush. We're using an air tool with the grinder on it. Whatever you can to get all the loose and residual rust off of there. When you're grinding this down, be careful not to mar up the studs. Also, this is a time for eye protection and respiratory protection, a mask or a dust mask of some sort. Go ahead and get in here as best you can with the tools that you have. After cleaning off as much as the old residue and the rust that you can, go ahead and use a compressed air blowgun, whatever you can to get off the remaining residue. We're going to use some brake cleaner. If you use brake cleaner or anything liquid, just make sure you have some kind of spill protection down. I'm just going to clean those threads. Now you should be good to put some anti-seize on this nice clean surface. Because this is anti-seize, it's okay if you get a little bit on the threads. It will just help the lug nuts not get stuck on. So now we're going to go ahead and mount our rotor backwards. I'm going to put 2 lug nuts on. You can do 1 or 2. I'm going to go do 2. And we're going to get these finger tight. Now what we're going to do, because metal and rotors are usually shipped with some kind of oil coating, there might be some grease on there. We're going to go ahead and clean that off with brake parts cleaner, and we're going to flip it and install it. And what you're focusing on to clean is the outer surface where the brake pads will make contact. Go ahead and take your lug nuts off. Now in the next step, grab it from the outside, pull it out, flip it over, reinstall it the best you can without touching the surface and reintroducing grease on the surface that you just cleaned. So we'll go ahead and back it out. Flip. Install. We'll go ahead and put those 2 lug nuts back on. You can use 1 lug nut. I just like to keep it evenly seated. And now we're going to clean the front surface with some brake parts cleaner. Follow it with the rag, removing any grease and oil from the surface the pads will touch. So now we have our caliper bracket outside the vehicle. We're going to check a few things. We're going to check these rubber boots for the caliper pins. They do have some old grease on them. Be careful wiping them. Sometimes they're old enough they just deteriorate. What we're looking for here is cracks or splits or any sign that they are falling apart. These look pretty good. We will clean them a little further, just a quick visual inspection. Good. Now, what we're going to do is clean inside this bracket where the brake hardware and clips go. You can use a wire brush, air tool, whatever you have to get rid of your loose rust and corrosion that was built up in here. We do recommend eye protection and respiratory protection now. We'll go ahead and take care of these. Now we'll flip it over and get the other side. Now at this point, it's not a bad idea just to remove any loose rust scale that's built up on here. At this point, ours looks pretty good. So we're going to go and just clean these threads a little bit, just clean this up so it reinstalls easier. We are going to install some grease on these, so get rid of the old grease that's on there. Just going to use some brake parts cleaner. And a rag or a wire brush just to get in the threads. Ours are actually pretty clean. And we'll move on to the next. So where your pins go through these boots into the caliper bracket, we went ahead and just sprayed some brake clean in there. There's a bunch of grease that you want to just make sure is cleaned out enough where you can put your new grease in. So we just used the pick tool and just took out as much grease as we can. And we'll go ahead and blow these dry with air tool, compressed air, flip them over, drain out whatever's left in there. Now you're ready to reinstall your caliper bracket. So now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our caliper bracket. Go ahead and slide it into position. And thread in our bolts. And with our 17mm socket, we'll go ahead and snug these up. and we'll tighten them down to the specified torque. So now we're going to torque these two caliper bracket bolts 74 foot-pounds, 17 millimeter socket. So now before we install our brake hardware, I'm going to put a little brake grease where the pads will sit. We're going to do this off the caliper bracket so that way we're not getting grease on our new rotor. And just apply where the pads will sit. Now we can install this onto our caliper bracket. Like so. Repeat for the top. And if you do get grease on your rotor, just make sure you go back, wipe it up with some brake parts cleaner. Now we can install our brake pads into the clip and rotate in place. Same with the other side. Into the clip, rotate in place. So now before we reinstall our caliper over these pads, we have new pads, which usually means they're thicker. So the caliper is pressed out to match the depth of your old pads. So before we put this back on, we need to compress this caliper to slide over. To do that, we're going to remove the brake bleeder cover. And there will be some fluid that comes out, so we want to make sure you have a spill mat or a rag down. And we're going to open our bleeder with our 8mm wrench. So you see a small flow. Now we're going to compress our piston. We're just going to use a C-clamp and not pressing on the brake hose bolt, but on the caliper itself. We're going to position into the piston, onto the caliper. Make sure our hose is out of the way, and we're going to compress that caliper. That looks good. While it's stripping, you want to go ahead and close that bleeder screw with your 8mm wrench. You can go ahead and take out your C-clamp. And what that does is it prevents pressure building back up through your system and possibly doing damage to your ABS module. Tighten this back up, reinstall your bleeder cap. Now we're ready to mount our caliper, so we'll go ahead and remove it from its hanger. Before we do that, we're going to look at the piston seal, make sure there's no leaks. If there are any leaks or any wet spots around this piston, that's an indicator that you need to replace your caliper. Ours looks pretty good, so we're going to reinstall it. Go ahead and slide it into place. Making sure to compress your boots, your rubber boots, top and bottom, that they don't get ripped. And now you can install your pins. We're going to put a little grease on our caliper pins. And tighten those down with the 14mm socket. So now that our caliper bracket and caliper and pads are installed, we can take these two lug nuts off of our rotor and install the tire. I'm going to just take these off their 17mm socket. It should just be finger tight. Now we'll install a tire. So with the 17mm socket, we'll go ahead and snug up these bolts. Now with the tire on the ground, so it's unable to rotate, we'll go ahead and grab our 17mm socket, set it to 73 foot-pounds torque, and we're going to run around these lug nuts in a star pattern to lock the wheel on.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.